as a brief introduction, my name is Keith Fisher. I'm Director of Conservation Programs for the Nature Conservancy in West Virginia. And in that, my role with the Conservancy's oversight of our stewardship or management activities, our land protection, acquisition, and our science functions within the chapter. And this presentation I gave a few months back at a workshop on cooperative weed management areas at the National Conservation Training Center, and then was asked to repeat the presentation for this webinar. So the Potomac Highlands Cooperative Weed and Pest Management Area was in large part born out of necessity. There really was not much focus on invasive species in West Virginia, particularly collectively by a number of organizations prior to us starting this weed and pest management area. So it really started in 2009 based primarily on the interests of three organizations, and interests, I would say more needs of three organizations, those being the Nature Conservancy, the U.S. Forest Service, and Fish and Wildlife Service, but also included a number of organizations in that mix. And, you know, the three things that really were out there that we needed to address were, one, we all recognize the growing problem with invasive species, but we didn't, in West Virginia, understand what those invasive species are, what the problems were, where they were at, or how much of an issue it was. We also recognized that there was definitely a lack of ability or capacity on the part of any one organization to deal with the issue by themselves. And particularly in the landscape where we're working, we're in the eastern part of West Virginia, adjacent to Monongahela National Forest, which is roughly 1 million acres, and George Washington Jefferson National Forest. So there's a large component of public land, but it's mixed with private land. So there was a definite need to cross the public-private divide. As I'm sure all of you are aware, you know, we can treat invasives on public land, but right across the fence, if they're still there, it just keeps coming back to us. So, you know, one of the big advantages of this was to be able to cross that divide and work on both sides of the fence. So in 2009, the group got together and we held an initial scoping meeting. We probably had roughly 60 to 70 folks in the room from various organizations that ran across the board, from land management organizations to academic. We had a number of private landowners in the room. In this initial scoping meeting, we kind of talked about all of the issues that everyone was seeing. We kind of talked about what our potential avenues to address these issues was. And in essence, we left that meeting with an agreement at the end that, yes, there is definitely a need. We all recognize that. We all recognize the growing problem. We had a general outline or a general scope of what we wanted to do, what we wanted a cooperative weed management area to look like. We had an outline of a boundary of what the landscape would look like, and we had volunteers for a steering committee. So we had a start on how we would proceed forward. So over roughly the next year or so, the steering committee began to meet, and we worked to, you know, define a mission for the cooperative weed and pest management area, what we wanted to accomplish, and you can see the mission there on the slide. But it really was focusing on, you know, prevention and management of invasive species, and our landscape is in the South Branch of Potomac River, which is part of the headwaters of Potomac River in the Highlands of West Virginia and Virginia. We also left there with a pretty good landscape boundary, and if you can see, hopefully you can see my cursor on there, but you know, the landscape boundary is right on the West Virginia line, and the green that you see there is part of Monongahela National Forest. Here's actually another slide of it that shows the landscape boundary, and that in white is private land, and what you see there is in green is public land. So we defined the landscape boundary of roughly 670,000 acres. That includes federal lands managed as part of national forests. It includes state wildlife management areas, state parks, state forests. It includes some preserves owned by the Nature Conservancy, but it also includes quite a mix of privately owned lands. The majority of that being agriculture and timber management, the vast majority. There really is pretty limited development within this area. So the steering committee began to define the mission. We defined our landscape boundary, and then we worked to define kind of the overarching goals and objectives for the weed management area. These goals and objectives really focused on, you know, three primary areas. One, we wanted to work on the ground and be able to treat invasive species in the landscape. We wanted to build the partnership so that we could all work together and share resources. And we wanted to increase public awareness through outreach and education. So that's really what the three goals of the CWPMA became. We did, as part of this, develop an MOU between all of the participating organizations, and that MOU was signed by about 13 different organizations. But again, it remains primarily 3 to 5 partners that are the most participatory, I would say. And in saying that, I don't mean they don't come to the steering committee. All of the partners come to the steering committee and participate. There's a group of them that are primarily able to work and fund projects, bring funding to the table, develop grants, and those sorts of things in support of activities within the weed management area. So the MOU was developed. It was signed by all of the organizations, and the steering committee, with these kind of fundamental components in place, began development of a 5-year strategic plan. So in development of all this, we really followed the CWMA cookbook that's out there for kind of everyone to follow. I won't say necessarily we followed it step by step, but we did kind of put all of the elements in place that are found in that cookbook. And we also borrowed heavily from other CWMAs and talked to folks and really picked their brain and figured out how to put all of this together. And the way it's organized right now is the Nature Conservancy, which is the primary NGO participating in the CWPMA, is kind of the fiscal manager for the organization. Now, we were very successful in the beginning in this initial stage, and I think one of the things that really helped us move forward was we applied for and were successful in receiving a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation Pulling Together Initiative grant. And I right now don't remember the exact amount of it, but what it allowed us to do was to put in place a coordinator. So because of the funding level we had, we weren't able to hire a full-time coordinator that would stay with us over multiple years, but we were able to support a full-time AmeriCorps Vista volunteer with a stipend, and they became the coordinators. So they were really the ones that were responsible for kind of organizing the steering committee meetings, pulling information together. They helped with grant writing activities to really coordinate between all of the partners and make it possible to hold the steering committee meetings, kind of move the strategic planning process through the elements, and and work through that process with all the steering committee meetings participants. So I would say that that was really a key element for us in successfully setting up the CWPMA, was to very early in the process have the ability to put someone on it that could focus on all of the necessary elements. Unfortunately, in these settings, and I will include myself, you know, most of the agency folks are borrowing time. They have full-time jobs doing other things, and it's hard to really get their attention in time to focus on something like this and move it forward in a timely fashion. So that was really advantageous to receive that grant and put a coordinator in place and be able to move things forward. Now, as we move down through the goals, the integrated pest management component, really the treatment component was a big element for us. We were able to identify and put out information initially on some of the key problem species. We published a brochure on the 11 species within the cooperative weed management area that we considered the most problematic. We were able to define the parts of the landscape, because 670,000 acres is a big spot of ground to work in. So we really defined key elements of the landscape that we wanted to focus on. And in large part, we started that by looking at areas of high conservation value within that landscape. Where are there really important habitats? Where are there really important species that are threatened by invasive species? And begin to work in those areas, control or manage invasive species within those populations or within those habitats, and then create buffers around them. And we really worked on trying to do that on both sides of the divide where possible. We really worked with a lot of private landowners in areas where we were focusing to enable us to get on their property and treat invasive species on their property, to help us in our management actions on public lands as well. So over the past 4 years, we have been able to continue funding from grant sources. We also have a cost share agreement between the Nature Conservancy and the U.S. Forest Service, who contributes funding to support what we call an ecosystem support team. And it varies in size from year to year a little bit depending on funding level, but we generally always have a crew leader and between 2 to 4 crew members who actually work on the ground treating invasive species. And every year, members of the steering committee and partners in the CWPMA develop an annual work plan as kind of nested under the strategic plan. And in this annual work plan, we define where on the landscape we're going to put this crew. And with the funding that we pull from the various grant sources and the partnerships, we're able to put a crew on the ground and work on public lands and also work on private lands. So we've been able, over the past 4 years, to treat about 2,000 acres of invasive species and a number of different species within this landscape, but again focused on both public and private lands. One of the things we've started doing with this in recent years, we have kind of expanded our activities in the CWPMA into Virginia. And originally we were working mostly on Monongahela National Forest and private lands around that. Kind of expanded our scope of activities into George Washington. And we're beginning to integrate invasive species management with fire management. Over in George Washington, we began by treating invasives on areas that they had designated for future prescribed burns. So to begin to merge those two kind of management strategies and management goals together to more holistically manage the landscape. This is just kind of a snapshot of some of the partners that are participating in this. As I said, there are 13 original signers. of the MOU, but we have roughly 30 organizations and private landowners that participate regularly in our steering committee meetings and regularly in the cooperative. All of these partners are the ones that get together and make decisions about what we're going to do in the CWPMA. They make decisions about what goes into the annual plan and work together to share resources as best we can to kind of accomplish the goals outlined in those annual plans. And many of them do this, that some of them can't directly provide funding, or they don't have the resources to have someone write a grant, but they may assist in providing match through some of the activities for some of the grants we apply for. So there's multiple ways that these partners can contribute to activities within the weed management area. And then just to go back and kind of our second goal was building and enhancing this partnership and working to pull everyone together. One of the key aspects was we found without doing this, we really can't accomplish the goals that we choose to accomplish within the weed management area. And education and outreach has also been one of the primary objectives of the weed management area. We've had, it's kind of grown in scope. We do publish a quarterly newsletter. We do have a website. We've put out videos on YouTube, brochures that we put together. We have a Facebook page. We hold various events in the weed management area landscape to more directly engage not only youth and build their understanding of what the problem is and how they might contribute to addressing the issue, but I think more directly with landowners. And we talk with them to explain what the issue is. They actually become our eyes on the ground and report back to the CWPMA about where they're seeing invasives. And we use this as kind of an early detection, early response network. We did have one success story recently, and I'm trying to recall what the invasive species was, one of the vines, but it showed up on a landowner's piece of property. They came and reported it in. We sent the crew out there. It was the only known population of it within the landscape. We sent the crew out there, treated it, and continue to monitor it. So it was kind of a little success story about how that outreach to private landowners can benefit kind of the greater objectives of the weed management area. But we also work with these groups to, we have a program with Petersburg Elementary School where we teach them about invasive species. We teach them how to use GPSs, and they in essence become kind of a citizen science network for us. And they also help track, help bring in information, but they participate directly. We have a garlic mustard challenge every year that some of the partners really focus on, particularly the U.S. Forest Service. And Petersburg Elementary School is instrumental in that program. I think the picture there is a group from the school and the bags of garlic mustard that they have pulled in the landscape. So it's really a good opportunity for us to reach out to a lot of different folks and explain to them about the issues with invasive species and enlist their participation more directly. We've also been able to put up, do some PSAs and put up some billboards within the landscape about the issues around moving firewood and some of the invasive species associated with that activity. Well, that's the little story about the vine there that I was telling you about. But we were able to go out and treat that and remove the only known population from the landscape. And that was published in the West Virginia Farm Bureau News. So a little bit of a success story on that one. So a little bit about some of the accomplishments of the weed management area. Through the participation of all of the partners, we've been able to leverage over $500,000 over the past, since 2009 anyway, in support of CWPMA activities. So a lot of this funding has gone directly to treatments on the ground, and a lot of it has gone directly to the outreach and education activities that, I've described that we conduct within the cooperative weed management area. We've treated over 2,000 acres. Some of that multiple years, as all of you are well aware. You can't go out and treat it one time. You have to keep going back and retreating to make sure that you have effectively controlled the problem. We've supported, and this one is actually a little bit out of date, we did support a full-time AmeriCorps Vista coordinator for 3 years. Now, I will say that one of the limitations we found with that, it worked well in the initial stages, but unfortunately with AmeriCorps Vista, you end up replacing that individual every year. So you kind of lose that institutional knowledge about what's going on and the experience with developing grants and the experience with working with partners. So what we've gone to now is supporting a permanent half-time coordinator that is actually a U.S. Forest Service employee and housed with the U.S. Forest Service, and that position is supported by the Nature Conservancy, the Forest Service, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And they serve as the coordinator not only for the cooperative weed management area, but a few other cooperative kind of management initiatives we have, like the Central Appalachian Spruce Restoration Initiative is another one. Now, I will say one other thing that wasn't highlighted on that slide, and one of the outcomes, I think, of this, well, actually a couple of them. One, through kind of the actions of the CWPMA, we have been able to get much more focus on invasive species issues within the Division of Forestry in West Virginia, including specific strategies within the Division of Forestry strategic plan for the state. We have worked with them a lot over the last couple of years in outreach to consulting foresters, including information that we provide and actually presentations that we give at training workshops that they give for consulting foresters as part of their continuing education requirements. And then the second one is that, I said initially that there was limited focus in West Virginia on invasive species. Well, through this process, we've been able to kind of branch out, spearhead developing a statewide invasive species management plan, and that's actually under development now. That was is being spearheaded by the West Virginia Division of Natural Resources. But I would certainly say that it's a spin-off and a result of the work that has been conducted as part of the cooperative weed management area. And I guess the last comment I'll make, we've been looking at opportunities to leverage this out as we're doing here to kind of, give our lessons learned in the hopes that, folks can take what we've learned and use it in their landscape. We're also right now working in initial phases of development of a weed management area down in the New River Gorge National River area. And we kind of took all of the lessons learned and the information we have and handed it to a separate group of partners down there, and we're really working with them to help them kind of develop a weed management area down there to assist them in some of the goals that they want to accomplish. So I guess with that, I will close out and answer any questions that might be out there.
Thanks, Keith. A couple questions that have come up. First, with the amount of acreage you have, I'm curious. First of all, I saw one person with a backpack sprayer, but what types of tools do you use, and whose tools are they? Do you have something for your group where you store the tools and anybody can use them, or do people there, your partners, just bring their own tools?
No, we have tools that we have purchased through the various grants and activities of the weed management area, and they're available to the partners, but the majority of the time they're used by the crew. We run the crew about 6 months a year,
Okay.
and which is the majority of time that you can effectively treat invasive species here. I will say that a lot of our equipment is backpacks or smaller stuff because of the ruggedness of the terrain.
Mm-hmm.
We're treating in a lot of areas that are unroaded or poorly roaded, where access is limited other than hiking in. So we do not have any like truck-mounted boom sprayers or anything of that nature that we use at this time. Although we have been in discussions with the Department of Transportation recently about some of the transportation corridors through the landscape, and working with them for them to use their equipment. They have that kind of equipment on some of the transportation corridors.
Okay, thanks. I think as a practical question, playing off of that, where do you house the equipment? And then if people want to use it, is it easy for them to just check it out? I think other CWMAs and SISMAs have had that question as well. I'm curious how you guys do it.
We have a storage facility. We have a kind of a unique situation. Our Nature Conservancy office is at, and it's in an old FAA building at the airport in Elkins, West Virginia, which is not, if you're not familiar with Elkins, it's a very small town, so we get about one airplane in here a month. But we've rented a large hangar in the airport as our storage facility.
Well,
and we store all of the equipment in there, and we do make it available to partners if they wish to use it. We also initially developed some kits which have, the kits themselves would have PPE in it, personal protective equipment. It would have spray equipment, and it would also, we would also provide herbicide. And we made it available to landowners who went through and met certain training requirements for proper application of some of these herbicides. And we have made that available to them as well. They can check that out and use it on the landscape.
Okay.
But I will say that the vast majority of the time, it is the crew that uses the equipment that we have.
Okay. And related to that as well, when you have such a large area to treat, one of the questions is how do you prioritize the areas you treat, and then what is your long-term plan on those sites?
Well, the way we prioritized initially was that the partners kind of got together and developed a list of priorities in the landscape, and one of those was areas of high conservation value. So we really looked at what our understanding of the landscape was with regard to important or rare habitat types or important or rare populations of species, or areas where there were threats, invasive species threats on public lands adjacent or private lands adjacent to some of these areas. And that really became the initial focus of the cooperative weed management area. So for the first several years, and it's pretty broadly distributed across the landscape, we really focused on treating invasives within those populations or within those important habitats and building buffers around them. We recently have kind of shifted, not entirely, but we've kind of broadened the scope, I guess I should say, to a sub-watershed approach. One of the issues we have in the landscape is Japanese knotweed, which I'm sure many folks deal with. And in this landscape, there are some very important, high-quality native brook trout streams. So we've been working with Division of Natural Resources and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program, which I failed to mention before, so I apologize to anybody from Fish and Wildlife Service out there, but they have and continue to be an important partner in this. And Trout Unlimited, and right now we're working on kind of a scope of a sub-watershed where we have some of these important, high-quality have 12 or so subwatersheds that have rare species in them. They have important trout streams. They're an important recreational resource. So those are the kinds of elements we have looked at to prioritize where we work in the landscape. I will say we have not given, not that it's not important, but just because we don't have the ability to, we have not put our resources into addressing weeds on agricultural land that occurs in this landscape. It's really where do we have problems that kind of affect both public and private and some of those important ecological or conservation resources that occur there.
Okay. And the long term, do you have like a set number of years you try to treat a site, or is it really where just depend on the funding, I guess?
It depends on funding, and I won't say that we have gotten that far yet. So far, we continue to monitor and treat as necessary every site that we have initially visited.
Okay. Great.
Some of them have begun to drop out as far as their need for treatments, but some of them we still continue to treat.
Okay. Well, Keith, thank you very much for your time today and sharing about your CWPMA. You see his information on the screen there. In the audience, thank you for joining us today as well. Again, this has been recorded too, so if you know anyone that would benefit from this information, please jump online and let them take a look at it. Keith, thanks a lot.
Oh, my pleasure.
I'm going to go ahead and sign off, guys.